The world stopped when King Charles stepped out at Windsor and uttered words no one expected. "It's over." The crown was changing immediately, and with a single name, he altered the royal future forever. No one had anticipated that the grand marble hall of Windsor Castle, so often the setting of rehearsed ceremonies and carefully controlled statements, would become the epicenter of a monarchy-shaking revelation. Courtiers, advisors, and senior royals had gathered expecting a conventional update of a speech, perhaps regarding new charitable efforts or the king's ongoing battle with fatigue. But as the heavy doors opened and King Charles entered alone, a weight fell upon the room. Camilla was nowhere to be seen. His expression was pale, drawn eyes lined not just with age but with sorrow and steel resolve. Whispers subsided. Silence gripped the walls as if the past itself was holding its breath. He approached the royal lectern, his steps steady, yet something was different. Gone was the air of ceremony. What followed was not a message penned by palace aides or rehearsed with advisors. It was raw. It was final. And it would change everything. "It's over," Charles began. And then, with measured breath, the words that followed cracked through centuries of tradition like a thunderclap. "The monarchy must evolve. I name Princess Catherine Regent of the realm." A moment of stunned disbelief paralyzed the room. Not Queen Camilla, not William, but Catherine. The room erupted in hushed gasps, aides turning to each other in silent confusion, journalists reaching for phones as though to confirm the reality unfolding before them. William himself was reportedly motionless, blinking, unsure whether to intervene or let it unfold. The weight of Charles' words didn't just suggest delegation, it was authority transferred, power passed, and an entire lineage shifted in a single breath. And it wasn't an abdication. That's what made it all the more astonishing. Charles had not stepped down. He had crowned someone while still wearing the crown himself. The appointment of Catherine as regent, a move not witnessed in modern royal history, bypassed not only expected protocol but personal expectations. Camilla, once positioned as the king's unwavering partner in rule, had not even been mentioned. As the footage of Charles's announcement swept through social media, headlines blared phrases that seemed pulled from fictional dramas rather than real life. The monarchy rewritten, Catherine crowned in all but name. Where is Camilla? Questions flooded every screen, but no answers came. Instead, only ripples rippled across the Commonwealth, shaking confidence, loyalty, and power. Was this a gesture of admiration, of desperation, or something more ominous? Had illness clouded the king's mind? Or was it something far deeper, buried not in policy, but in personal pain? Sources close to the family whispered of mounting pressures behind closed doors, a looming fracture no longer containable, and above all, the voice of a figure long past, whose final wish might have dictated the future of the realm. But behind this historic announcement lies a secret chamber of family betrayal, silent illness, and one final request from a mother long gone. Hidden for years behind a sealed compartment in the royal archives, Queen Elizabeth's final letter resurfaced, and it changed everything. What she wrote about Catherine would make even Camilla tremble. Whispers had circulated within the palace for years of a final message, a private testament the Queen had allegedly written in the twilight of her reign. Few believed it truly existed, and even fewer imagined its contents could ever see the light of day. But when Princess Anne, in a moment of quiet desperation, found herself in the royal archive chambers following Charles's controversial announcement, fate intervened. Behind a velvet panel, sealed in wax and marked in the Queen's unmistakable hand, were the words, "To be opened upon royal crisis." What Anne discovered inside that envelope would ignite a flame no one could extinguish. The Queen's pen had not lost its sharpness in her final days. Her words, though measured, were heavy with intent. In the letter, Elizabeth expressed deep admiration for Catherine not just as a wife or mother, but as a woman born to lead. She described Catherine as the embodiment of grace, composure, and quiet fortitude. "She is," the Queen had written, "the future core of the monarchy. Where duty may falter, her loyalty shall hold." But it was what followed that turned that letter into a ticking time bomb. The Queen made her views on Camilla painfully clear. With subtle but deliberate phrasing, she warned against granting Camilla any official regency or sovereign responsibility. "The monarchy must be preserved by those with public trust, not merely private alliance," she wrote. It was a direct rebuke, an undeniable closing of a door Camilla had spent decades forcing open. Charles, upon learning of the letter's unsealing, reportedly requested it be brought to the royal chapel. There, alone in the candlelit silence, he read every word slowly, as if absorbing not just his mother's message, but her final command. Palace aides noted that he remained inside for nearly an hour. When he emerged, his eyes were rimmed with tears. His steps were slower, and his resolve was absolute. This letter, this hidden echo of Elizabeth's judgment, became the moral backbone of his decision. When critics, advisors, and even members of the House of Lords questioned why Camilla was passed over, Charles had a single reply: "It's what Mother wanted." But behind those words was something more complex. A mixture of loyalty to his mother, guilt over past decisions, and a quiet understanding that the monarchy could not withstand another public fracture. William, too, was drawn into this private truth. It's said that Charles placed the letter into his hands with trembling fingers and whispered, "You'll understand soon enough." In that moment, the crown became more than a title. It became a torch passed through generations, now finding its next flame not in blood, but in trust. But if the Queen's voice echoed from beyond, Camilla's rage would roar in the present, and she wouldn't go down quietly. When Camilla learned she was officially excluded from power, the palace halls reportedly shook. Her fury became public, unfiltered, and unforgettable. The moment Charles's declaration echoed through Windsor's ancient walls, the ripple effect was instant, but nowhere did it crash harder than in Camilla's private quarters. She hadn't been informed, not fully, not truthfully. According to palace insiders, she had only caught wind of a special announcement the night before, and assumed it would be some symbolic shift, perhaps a temporary handover due to Charles's worsening health. What she hadn't imagined, not even in her most guarded fears, was that Catherine would be publicly elevated as regent. The crown had been passed within her reach, and then snatched away in front of the world. What followed next was not whispered disappointment, it was volcanic rage. Screams reportedly tore through Windsor's East Wing, so loud and jarring that senior staff momentarily mistook them for a security breach. Camilla stormed through the corridor, hair unkempt, voice rising with each step, until she reached the royal council chamber. Witnesses described her as betrayed and blind with rage, a woman undone by what she viewed not just as a political blow, but a personal humiliation. Inside that room, Camilla confronted Charles directly. Her words weren't masked in protocol. She called the move a farce, accused him of undermining her loyalty, and shouted that the monarchy was being handed over to the Windsor PR puppet. The air in the chamber was electric with shock. No one had ever seen her speak to the king this way, not even during the height of public scrutiny after their marriage. Charles, though shaken, didn't flinch. In a voice both resigned and resolute, he simply told her, "The people don't want you. They've chosen her." With that, Camilla reportedly turned her back on him and stormed out, issuing a flurry of cancellations within the hour. Every scheduled public engagement was pulled. Meetings postponed. Appearances scrubbed from royal schedules. Even more telling, Camilla refused to appear beside Charles for the remainder of the week, citing personal recuperation, though those closest to her knew better. This wasn't a retreat, it was a rebellion in silence. The press noticed almost immediately. Tabloids began speculating, "Where is Queen Camilla?" Royal rift erupts, and beneath the surface, royal security teams raised their alert status. The tone in Camilla's outbursts had been sharper than anything they'd recorded in years. Senior staff feared leaks, others feared something worse, a complete walkout. One aide even warned of a potential constitutional retaliation. It was no longer just about losing power, it was about vengeance for being humiliated. And yet, amid the noise, there was one person who said nothing: Catherine. While Camilla was making her fury known to anyone who would listen, Catherine remained silent, stoic, unshaken, or so it seemed. But behind the poised exterior, doubt was beginning to take root. Because while Camilla lost her power in a blaze of fury, Catherine was about to discover the price of gaining it, and it came with a haunting warning. For Catherine, being named regent wasn't a fairy tale. It was a haunting honor, because just hours after the announcement, a secret warning from Diana's former staff arrived, and it chilled her to the core. The echo of Charles's declaration was still reverberating through royal chambers when Catherine finally stepped away. Alone in a private room, she shut the door and collapsed into the solitude that had eluded her since Windsor turned into a battlefield of ambition and betrayal. The applause from royal loyalists had faded. The press was still spinning the moment as historic, but inside her, there was no triumph, only a trembling sense of foreboding. For all the titles in the world, nothing had prepared her for this weight. The gaze of the monarchy, the judgment of history, and the resentment of those cast aside, all of it now bore down upon her shoulders. As she sat in the stillness, a knock interrupted her thoughts. A royal aide, silent and pale, handed her an envelope, one not delivered through official channels. The handwriting was foreign to her, but the words on the front stopped her breath cold. To the next woman crowned. No seal, no crest, just ink and tension. Inside, the letter was simple, but the message was anything but. It came from one of Princess Diana's most trusted former aides, a man who had disappeared from the public eye decades ago. His words weren't ceremonial, they were raw, stripped of diplomacy, and piercing. "This crown comes with betrayal," the letter began, "and it comes with loss. It will love you in public and destroy you in private." He spoke of Diana not as an icon, but as a woman hunted by headlines, manipulated by those she trusted, and ultimately discarded by the very institution that once embraced her. Page after page, the truth unfolded like a slow wound. Stories of isolation behind palace doors, of rooms that watched but did not protect, of conversations twisted until they became weapons. He warned Catherine not to mistake ceremony for security, nor admiration for allegiance. "You will never truly be one of them," he wrote, "because you are too good to be." The message, though written with sympathy, left her shaken. Had she inherited a role or a trap? As Catherine sat with the letter in her lap, she felt the shimmer of the crown lose its luster. Was this appointment truly an honor? Or was it the palace's way of silencing its conscience by elevating the only woman who could still be loved by the public without question? The doubts swirled, dark and uncontrollable. William soon found her, still clutching the pages. He embraced her, but even in his arms, she could feel the tremor in him. He, too, had seen the cost of power. He, too, feared what might come next. Catherine had always walked the royal line with quiet strength, but for the first time, she wondered whether she was being guided toward glory or toward sacrifice. The shadows of Diana's past clung to the crown now resting over her future, and she knew this role wasn't just about leading, it was about surviving. But if Catherine now carried the burden of the crown, another family member was already plotting to take it back by force if necessary. With Camilla sidelined, her children weren't going to stand by. Tom and Laura Parker Bowles launched a behind-the-scenes operation that could undo everything Catherine had just gained. To the outside world, Camilla's absence was chalked up to exhaustion, a tactical retreat from the chaos unfolding around her. But behind palace doors, something far more dangerous was brewing. Her children, Tom and Laura, had grown up on the edges of royalty, tolerated but never embraced. And now, with their mother publicly humiliated and effectively erased from any future in the crown's inner workings, their patience snapped. They saw Catherine's regency not as a noble gesture of continuity, but as an aggressive rejection of their bloodline, one that needed to be countered with force. Laura, fiercely protective of her mother's legacy, became the quiet architect of what insiders would later call the rebellion. She leveraged every private contact and political favor accumulated during her time in the art world, and began reaching out to sympathetic members of Parliament. Her message was simple but loaded. Was the regency legal? Had King Charles, in his declining health, made the decision under duress or influence? The goal wasn't to win the public over, it was to sow doubt in the system. A shadow campaign designed to corrode trust from the inside out. Meanwhile, Tom operated on a different front. Rumors began surfacing that old communications from Charles' letters and private memos were quietly being passed to certain journalists. These messages allegedly painted the king as increasingly erratic, unsure, and even incoherent at times. One message reportedly stated, "I don't know who to trust anymore. Even William feels like a stranger." Whether real or fabricated, they ignited a firestorm. The implication was clear. If the king wasn't of sound mind, then the regency might be based on a compromise declaration. The media, ever hungry for scandal, seized upon the leaks. But the real blow came when whispers began surfacing that Camilla herself was planning a tell-all interview, something raw. Something that would paint her not as the villain but as the victim. A woman who had been loyal to the monarchy, only to be discarded like a political pawn. It was a narrative that had weight. It threatened to turn public sympathy in her favor and fracture the unity the crown was desperately trying to project. Suddenly, palace aides found themselves fighting a war they hadn't prepared for, an information war. Every press briefing was scrutinized. Every gesture by Catherine was questioned. Was she really in control? Or was she the centerpiece of a manipulated narrative? The Parker Bowles siblings leaned into the chaos, casting themselves as the wrongfully erased royals, the bloodline punished not for incompetence, but for being inconvenient to the image the firm now wanted to sell. Inside the palace, fear ran deep, not just of scandal but of collapse. The trust between the sovereign, the press, and the people was beginning to fray. Lines were being drawn not by protocol, but by perception. And with every whisper, every leak, the rebellion gained traction. But in the eye of this storm, a shocking act of defiance would put everything on hold and bring the nation to tears. The moment that broke the nation wasn't the king's speech or Camilla's fury. It was a child's quiet cry. Prince George, caught on camera in tears, became the symbol of a family collapsing. It happened during what was supposed to be a carefully orchestrated outing, a standard appearance by the new regent and her family, meant to steady the ship and project unity. Catherine stood with composed grace, William by her side, greeting a line of dignitaries, hands clasped in rehearsed diplomacy. But just steps away, their eldest son was unraveling. Cameras, always scanning the periphery for something unscripted, zoomed in. George, his lip trembling and his eyes welling, was visibly struggling to keep it together. And then, despite all the royal training, he broke. A single tear slid down his cheek, and the world watched. What no one knew at the time was what had taken place just an hour before. According to whispers among the palace staff, George had been in the corridor outside the king's private study when voices inside erupted. It wasn't the first time, but this one was different. A furious exchange between Charles and William, fathers, sons, heirs, unfiltered, painful, and loud enough to crack the silence of the ancient halls. Though George couldn't understand every word, he understood enough. "She's not safe in this," William had shouted. And Charles's reply, "She's what the monarchy needs, whether you like it or not." It was too much for a child raised in the shadow of crowns and expectations. Back at the event, a royal aide was seen bending toward George, her hand gently on his shoulder. The cameras caught its lips moving just enough to be read, "It's not your fault," a phrase no one could ignore. The video clip went viral within minutes, exploding across platforms, newsrooms, and dinner tables around the world. The future king crying in public, not from injury, not from stage fright, but from something deeper, something broken. Catherine, who had mastered the art of composure, didn't hesitate. The moment she saw him, she abandoned protocol. Her appearance ended instantly, with no explanation given. She took George's hand and led him away, leaving even her security caught off guard. The public response was immediate and heartbreaking. Parents wept watching the footage. Commentators called it the most human moment in royal history. And somewhere, deep within the institution, the image of George's tears sent a tremor far stronger than any rebellion or document leak. Because this wasn't about politics anymore. It wasn't about titles or succession. This was about a child, crushed under a legacy not of his making. A silent scream from the next generation, warning the world of what the monarchy costs its own. And in that tear, the myth shattered. But while the world wept with George, Charles was already preparing to reveal the final chapter in his plan, and it would shake the monarchy's foundation forever. In the heart of Windsor, under candlelight and sealed oaths, Charles made a pact that would render the old monarchy unrecognizable, and Catherine undeniably powerful. There was no grand procession, no choir, no balcony wave. The regency coronation was conducted in utter secrecy, away from cameras, headlines, and the roar of public debate. Inside the stone walls of St. George's Chapel, a sacred space once reserved for the most storied ceremonies in royal history, a quiet revolution was unfolding. Only a handful were summoned: Princess Anne, Prince William, 2 senior lords, and the Archbishop. The absence of Camilla said everything. And the weight of what was about to happen hung like a final breath before a plunge into deep, uncharted waters. Charles stood at the altar, fragile but composed, holding a velvet box in one hand and a folded parchment in the other. Before him, Catherine stood not as duchess or consort, but as a woman preparing to assume the power few ever imagined she would hold alone. There was no crown placed on her head, no orb or scepter. Instead, Charles opened the velvet box and removed a single sapphire ring deep blue and heavy with history. It had once belonged to Queen Victoria, worn only in times of deepest personal significance. Charles handed it to her not with pomp, but with trembling hands and words barely above a whisper. "Lead as I could not." It was more than a ceremonial line, it was a confession, an admission that he had been cornered by illness, family division, and the quiet judgment of a public still haunted by the shadow of Diana. By naming Catherine the regent of the realm in this private pact, Charles wasn't just granting her authority. He was asking her to cleanse the monarchy's wounds with her calm, her steadiness, and her unbroken favor among the people. This was no longer about survival. This was about rewriting the monarchy's identity without asking for permission. Then, the moment that would never be reported, never captured, but never forgotten by those who were present, William stepped forward. The heir, the son, the future king knelt, not before his father, but before Catherine. It wasn't required. It wasn't rehearsed, but it was undeniable. In that kneel was a transfer of loyalty, a gesture that said, "For now, you lead even above me." By the end of the brief ceremony, the parchment was signed, sealed, and stored within the chapel's archives. The pact had been made, a new order hidden beneath the old. And for a brief moment, silence reigned in Windsor, not out of peace, but out of shock. Within hours, royal insiders began leaking whispers of a private conferral of power. The palace issued no comment, but the truth lingered just beneath the surface. The monarchy had changed in a way no one could undo. The nation would not be told. Not yet. But within royal circles, the message was clear. Catherine's reign, even if unofficial, had begun. The rebellion, the resentment, the rumors, none of it mattered now. She had been chosen, anointed, empowered. But even as the crown passed in secret, one shadow remained, and it was the one person who could unravel it all. Just when the dust began to settle, an unexpected figure walked back into the palace gates. Prince Harry had returned, and he wasn't alone. After months of silence and absence, Harry's arrival was not marked by a public statement or ceremonial welcome. He flew in under the radar, arriving unannounced, escorted by a legal team whose faces the palace staff didn't recognize. There were no formal greetings, no embraces, just stiff nods and closed doors. It was clear from the moment he stepped foot onto Windsor soil that this was not a personal visit, it was a challenge. He demanded a private audience with the king, bypassing all traditional channels and refusing to speak to aides. When Charles was informed, he hesitated, but the request could not be denied. What unfolded behind those walls would become the most volatile royal confrontation in a generation. Clutched in Harry's hand were documents sealed, prepared, and stamped by attorneys operating outside the usual circle. They reportedly cited obscure constitutional loopholes, challenging the legality of Catherine's appointment as regent. The argument was bold, that such a transfer of authority, done in secrecy and without parliamentary or Commonwealth consultation, could be considered invalid. But more than legal, it was personal. Harry argued that his exclusion from royal duties, his mother's legacy, and his place in the line of succession had all been trampled by a palace desperate to restore public favor at any cost. Catherine, he insisted, was chosen not for law, but for optics. What followed was not a discussion, it was an eruption. Tension exploded in the royal chambers, with Charles and Harry locked in a heated argument late into the night. Their voices, according to insiders, echoed through the palace halls. Charles accused Harry of betrayal, of bringing ruinous timing to a fragile moment in royal history. Harry fired back, accusing his father of cowardice, of sacrificing justice to appease tradition. And behind it all was a threat that if Harry couldn't reclaim his rightful place, then he would expose the cracks in the very foundation the monarchy was now rebuilding. "Either I'm in," he allegedly warned, "or I bring the whole thing down." The next morning, Catherine approached Harry privately. She didn't come as regent, nor as rival. She came as a family. She pleaded with him to stop to see the damage being done not to the institution, but to the people within it. But Harry's response was as cold as it was heartbreaking. "You were never meant to wear the crown before me." There was no room left for understanding, no bridge left to repair. And in the background, the whispers grew louder, that Meghan had urged him to return, that the legal papers had been drafted weeks before the regency was confirmed, that this was not a sudden reaction but a long-planned strike. For a brief moment, the nation stood still again, not because of ceremony or scandal, but because the once-beloved brother had returned not as a healer but as a hammer. And as Harry departed Windsor once more, what came next would force the king to make a choice no father should ever face. After a lifetime of waiting, ruling, and surviving scandal after scandal, King Charles stepped down. But his final act wasn't just for peace, it was to protect the one he finally trusted. The palace had endured weeks of chaos. From Camilla's fury to Harry's final ultimatum, the monarchy stood at the edge of collapse. And in the middle of it all was Catherine quietly carrying a crown she never asked for, bearing the weight of a family's fractured legacy. Charles had watched it all unfold from the sidelines of his own reign. Too frail to fight, too aware to ignore, he saw what the monarchy had become, a machine devouring its own. And so, on a morning that began like any other, the crown did something it had resisted for centuries. It surrendered. Charles's abdication letter was released with little ceremony but maximum impact. It was short, direct, and unmistakable. He was stepping away completely, not temporarily, not symbolically, entirely. And with that single document, he handed over not just the burden of duty, but the full authority of leadership to Catherine, not simply as regent, but as acting sovereign of the realm. A title that, though lacking coronation, carried undeniable power. In the eyes of the institution, she had become the heartbeat of the monarchy, and in the eyes of the public, she already was. Camilla, still burning from her exclusion, made her choice known in silence. She departed Windsor without a word. No farewell, no final appearance, no gesture of unity. Her rooms were emptied overnight. Her name was removed from internal protocols. It was as though she had vanished, written out of the royal script she once fought to control. When the final ceremony was scheduled, she refused to attend. She would not witness the rise of the woman she believed had stolen her place. But history wouldn't pause for bitterness. Charles's final address, delivered from the same place where he had once been declared king, was unlike anything he'd ever spoken. It was emotional, stripped of pomp, and filled with a clarity that had long evaded him. "I was crowned by duty," he said, voice quivering. "She is crowned by love." It was a statement not just of transition, but of redemption. A father acknowledging the limitations of his reign and the hope embedded in the one who followed. Then came the moment that confirmed everything. In front of the world, William bowed. And moments later, so did Prince George. A future king and his heir, both acknowledging the authority of a woman not yet crowned, but already ruling. It wasn't just symbolic, it was seismic. The old order had officially ended. And a new one, softer in tone but fiercer in resolve, had begun. The Windsor Address was replayed in every language across the globe. Political analysts called it unprecedented. Constitutional experts scrambled for clarity. But to the people, none of that mattered. They saw a woman take the throne not through entitlement, but through sacrifice. And as Catherine stood, shoulders straight, eyes forward, the monarchy was reborn not through lineage, but through earned legacy. And so, in a monarchy built on lineage, it was legacy and love that finally rewrote the future. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.